We're delighted to be here today for this session. My name is Amir Bani Fatemi. My job is Chief Responsibility Officer at a company called Cognizant. And we're super excited about this discussion today, which is about really AI for inclusive economic progress, aligned with the theme of this summit, but also try to attempt to discuss what we call the public services AI stack. We'll know about the stack of AI, and today we're going to talk about evolution of this stack together as a group. In fact, this story started about 10 years ago, where a conjunction of events happened. In 2015, the United Nations came with this new approach called the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, AI started coming out of the labs and being more present. And this conjunction did lead to something that we call today AI for Good. But this AI for Good gradually grew over the years, and all the companies, all the NGOs, all the institutions and policymakers took a close look at it and started thinking about how we can implement AI for the good of people, for the common good, for the public, and led to this evolution of a number of applications and examples and demonstration and pilots about how AI can be used for the good of humanity. At the same time, an increase of AI systems have developed very rapidly, mostly for productivity and commercializations. And the scale of AI has gone so fast that probably we have had a chance to talk about how this rapid pace is basically benefiting people as well, beyond the opportunities for commercializations and productivity gains. But also the stack that we're talking about, the infrastructure that we're building, is basically serving that goal. So today we're gathered today to talk about really what it means to build sustainable infrastructure that could help people and create services that governments, communities can provide to their citizens and constituents in a manner that could be not only guaranteed, accountable, sustainable, and transparent, but also built on a foundation of digital public goods and infrastructure that could be governed, that could be sustained, and could be respectful of cultures, communities, and the wishes of people. And as we talk about sovereign AI these days, sovereignty is important for governments, but also one of the questions that what is important for individuals, for every citizen, how the citizen can benefit from it individually and separately. So we're delighted together to be today with each other and then have this conversation. I'm going to introduce from far left our speakers, and you can see their pictures on the screen. I'm going to start not on the screen, but on the order over there. So on the far left, Alpesh Shah is the managing director of IEEE Standards, and he may talk a little bit about what they do. Next, you have Gabriela Ramos, who's head of the task force on Always Forget Digital Inequalities, but former assistant director general of the UNESCO until recently. And then Joanna Shields, who's the CEO of a company called Precognition, but also executive chair of the Responsible AI Foundation. Mark Surman, who's the president of Mozilla, talking about open source, of course. Professor Ravindran, which I have the pleasure to have known recently, but he's not only head of data science and AI at IIT Madras, but also he's chairing a number of initiatives, including the Center for Responsible AI India. And final but not last, Wanzili, who's the director of Infocom Authority, Media Authority in Singapore, IMDA, to join us today. We have prepared a lot of questions for you and to discuss, but maybe we'll simplify some of them because we are running short of time. Hopefully we can, give me a second, please, so I can bring those questions back to you. But I would like to start with maybe starting with Gabriela. If you talk about benefiting people and creating infrastructure to benefit people from the far end of this conversation, what is that we should absolutely not forget about that could be missed if we forget about that? Can you start us with that?
Well, thank you so much, and so nice to be with these wonderful speakers. And
I think the microphone is not working.
It's not working? Is it working? Thank you so much. That was good. Well, no, I think that the question is really not about AI. The question is about what is the context in which this transition is happening. And it's a context, as you know, with very high inequalities. Inequalities that are there independent of the AI, inequalities in terms of income, opportunities, outcomes for people, and we see it not only in the developing world that is still confronting many social challenges, but also in the advanced economies. And therefore, the AI transition is not happening in a vacuum, and actually is contributing to increase inequalities because it's highly concentrated, 2 countries producing the major foundational models in English, particularly, and the Global South, we are takers of technology, users of technology. It's good that we now have open source and that we can also frame the models in a way that is suited for us. So I feel that we need to consider that as a very important framing of the issue, because at the end, the governments need to govern AI, but they also need to govern with AI. And therefore, they are the enablers. They are the ones that need to be ensuring connectivity when there is 1/3 of the world that has no access to stable internet. They need to be doing the investments in skills, and these are huge challenges. They need to be producing the incentives because they cannot do it by themselves. So they can use the procurement systems probably to ensure that the companies are also investing in their people. So I feel we have these all frameworks that need to be put together to deliver a much more inclusive outcomes. Just think about one single issue that is so impressive, because it's not only the pervasiveness of the transition, but it's also the very fast speed. When I started working at the OECD and we were looking at what kind of jobs were going to be transformed, disappear from the markets thanks to the technologies, and we were just looking at those that could have their task codified, the clerical jobs. Now we're in Gen AI. Everybody's going to be touched, and the transition is so fast. How do we adapt the social protection systems? And therefore, I feel that all of these investments is not only about the financial issues, but it's the adapting the systems in a way that deliver for people.
I would like to go to Joanna, but before Joanna, I would like to ask Professor Ravi. The title is called AI for Inclusive Economic Progress. What does inclusive economic progress means in practice?
So, I mean, I completely agree with what Gabriela said. So, I mean, talking about inclusive economic progress, especially, I'll talk about the country I know best about, so India, right? So it's not the question of AI enabling inclusive economic progress. There is already a significant digital divide that exists in this country. So when you're going to start talking about inclusive economic progress, we really have to go down to that level and start addressing that. And you know, so it's not just a question of economic progress. Economic progress comes from a whole bunch of other things, like making sure you have better access to health, better access to education. So there are so many layers at which AI can potentially help, as long as you're making sure that you get past the the digital access barrier, and which is something that we should take a fresh look at. I mean, you mentioned about few countries that are AI producers and the global south are AI consumers. In fact, most of global north also is AI consumers right now. So there are like literally 4 people in the world who control the direction of AI. And in some sense, is that the right direction for us? When you start talking about inclusive economic progress, should it be something that is predicated on using the frontier models to build our entire AI infrastructure on? It's not clear to me, right? So I think we really have to step back and start thinking about what is the right AI stack, so that we can start talking about deployment at the at the population scale in a country like India. Right? Should it be the next greatest the GPT model or whatever is coming out, or should it be something more local focus? At least Sarvam has been in the news recently for a lot of these smaller models that they are building that are very good at solving India-specific problems. I think there should be significant rethink as to what is the right AI stack for the global south to ensure economic progress.
Thank you for that setting. And we're going to go to the AI stack, but before I have a question from Joanna. You have a very interesting vantage point, being in government and private sector, and now with the Responsible Foundation. In your opinion, what have been the decisions and investment that we have done so far in the past 5 to 10 years that you think create dependencies that we cannot reverse?
I couldn't hear the last part.
What are the investments and decisions that we have made that create dependencies that we cannot reverse today?
Sorry, I have a bad
She has an
ear.
infection, ear infection, so sorry, I said I shared that information.
So, okay, so first of all, before we start, can I ask the audience a question? How many people in this audience are entrepreneurs using AI to build software products? Quite a few. And how many of you guys are in public sector? Okay, well, it's about evenly split. So for those of you in the camp that are building these AI products, how many of you guys have witnessed the incredible transformation in the last couple of months in terms of capabilities, both in the foundational models, proprietary ones, but also in the open source side? So I think what we're witnessing here, it's almost kind of like Mark. Yeah. We're at a stage now where things have so dramatically changed that we have to look at this from, and going back to what Gabriela was saying, we have to look at this not just as, what can we do to deliver better services in government? We need to look at it like, as a massive economic opportunity for all these young entrepreneurs. So having been on both sides, been in government and also in private sector building these products, it's absolutely vital at this stage to activate the entrepreneurs and the network of people in the country. And the reason I want to say that here is because if we're going to have AI diffuse to the global south, the AI that we build has to represent the cultures, the language, the characteristics, so the people we are in every country that we live in. And that's the role you're all playing here. It's such a vital role. So as a government person, I would say, almost throw the playbook away and think about how do you build those services with entrepreneurs that solve real problems in your country and advance, empowerment and create economic opportunity. And I think, Amir, your question was what's been changing, what are the dependencies? But it's actually changed so much in the last couple months that my answer is changing. Because all the best laid plans, every government has an AI strategy and an economic, plan, but if you think about the progress recently, you have to almost reinvent this on a daily basis. Now, when you get to the next stage of applications where human outcomes are impacted, things like health and disaster relief and all these other applications, it's a different, type of decision. It takes more time. You have to take more care. You're using people's private data. So there's all kinds of considerations there. But on this basic level of citizen services, the daily things that you go to government for, that's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs in every country around the world.
Well, you're putting the stakes in front of all of us and really high, but to meet that stakes, if public services that you're defining to benefit people everywhere and solve real problems are important, what is the architectural standing for that? What is the stack that we need to define? The typical stack today is a very technical stack, which is infrastructure and data and models and applications. But I would like to turn to Alpesh to help us maybe have a interesting viewpoint on how do you see these stacks evolving and what's the role of standards to make the stack trustworthy? Because we're building all as entrepreneurs and researchers and activists and policymakers to new services, and the new services are based on a mechanism of a stack that is agreed upon for everyone, technically speaking. How do you see this stack evolving?
Sorry, Amir, we were playing with the microphones here, trying to get the right one. But if I...
Should I repeat the question? Or?
If I understood the question correctly, it was about where do we see the opportunities to enable economic development across existing infrastructure, and in particular when applying AI technologies in a more stack-based approach. Is that right?
And specifically the fact that we're defining that the opportunity for entrepreneurs and all resources everywhere is that we define services that benefit people and society. It requires an infrastructure. And this infrastructure, is it the same stack that we've been using, or there's a new stack that needs to emerge?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think first, maybe a disclaimer. All opinions here are my own. So, I won't say I'm speaking for my entire organization here. The second is, I think the way I'm thinking about what you're describing may be slightly different, because first, a lot of what we're discussing at the moment, India's already implemented from a India Stack perspective, right? I mean, you look at, they have the NCI, they have Aadhaar, they have all these pieces are there, and they're doing it using a distributed governance model, right? And this is also an example of standardization. And it's a mechanism to also think about how future deployments can occur without necessarily needing control over everything. I would add now to this that there are several additional elements personally I would take into account. The first is that when we're talking about the AI stack, I think everyone over here realizes the value of good governance. Incredibly important. It's very critical to ensure that we have not only the right contextual people at the table, but that on an ongoing basis, there's an assessment occurring of those systems so that the biases don't overtake, right? I mean, this is a part of a natural occurrence. You get so used to something, the norms become a part of your attuned thinking. Along with this, I would say that when I think of the stack, I'm thinking about it as a distributed model. And therefore, it's not only a public utility that may work in one city, it's a distributed technology that interconnects across multiple cities. Open source plays a critical role here because open source provides agency. And open standards give you the norms to support that to occur. Directions with the tools give you now a better chance. And when you look at this from the element then of what more could a stack like this offer beyond the analytics and forecasting of how trash from one place to another could be applied, it's the ability to enable the utilization of policies, procedures already implemented at the base level of a fabric. Let me ask everyone a question here. How many of you have time to read through an 11,000-page document to come up to speed of what needs to be done so that you can be compliant within your country? Nobody. He got it. Nobody has this time, even with AI. When you combine all the policies, you combine all the standards, you combine all the README codes, this is the tax you're putting on people. And we have to stop doing that. We have to start thinking about is how do we enable these stacks so that people don't have to go learn all of these other. The opportunity cost is too high. The barriers are too high. The systems need to work in a manner that enable and encourage. And what you could imagine happens when you do something like this is that you can take the same incubator stage flow that others use and start to use it as a way to certify folks around stage gates, right, across this fabric. But what becomes extra interesting is now, if you can see, here are all the actors in this room that are working on the same problem you're working on, that's an advantage. That gives you an opportunity to begin to think about, hey, do I need to continue investing in this, or can we figure out a way to do this differently?
So you're saying the stack needs to include standards and needs to include some form of
I'm saying the stack needs to offer the real benefits of what standardization provides, which is lowers barriers to entry, which enables greater trade and economic development. Open source plays a critical role in this. It helps reduce a lot of the concerns. It reduces vendor lock-in. At the same time, open standards play a critical role to go along with it. But these are all tools. The critical mechanism is enabling the environment that's conducive to inclusion and development in the end.
You're so right. We're going to talk about investment also because you need to put fuel to work. But I want to turn to Mark because we talk about openness and open source and transparency. You have an opinion about that, Mark, I'm sure, about this public AI stack.
Well, so many opinions. But I think the key piece in all this is to remember that we have a huge opportunity that is not abstract. I think exactly as Joanna said, I feel it. The cards have really been thrown up in the air in some ways that are a little bit scary, but also very exciting in the last little while, and that we can solve problems and build things so much faster now than we could when we first started talking about a lot of the DPI stacks, that we've talked about in the last 10 years. And so then how does that relate to how do we use these technologies today to create real public services that benefit people? Because I think that's at the heart of the question you're asking, Amir. And I would say, for me, one of the key principles in it is as we move fast to innovate, as we put significant amounts of government money and effort into using AI and other cutting-edge technologies for public services, we have to ground ourselves in the idea that public services need to be based on and build public goods. The public dollars need to produce public goods if I put public dollars in. So that's not actually a very complicated or new concept, but it's very easily lost. If we're talking about billions and billions and billions of whatever currency you're investing in, going into national AI strategies, sovereign AI strategies, public service strategies, making sure that we produce public goods. And I want to say two things that are very practical underneath that. One is we actually have a way to create digital public goods. It's already been mentioned right now. And open source is a proven way to do that. It's a proven licensing method to do that. You put money in, anyone can use it. You build something, anyone can modify it, anyone can use it. So we have a way to do that, and even industry knows that. I mean, all of the cloud providers, all of the big dominant hyperscalers contribute to the Linux ecosystem and so much more because they know if the underlying infrastructure is a public good, it makes industry go faster. It makes things cheaper for them. It makes things robust. So I think the first thing we need to remember is let's build these new public goods, these new public services on the base layer, whether it's the underlying base layer of the Linux stack or whether it's open source AI. Let's make sure that is open source and that's public goods, and just demand that, expect that of our governments, that that's how they spend money. That's what they choose. But I think then the other piece you're really getting at, Amir, is the services stack above that, which really is fruit ripe for innovation on education, on healthcare, on transportation, on so many aspects of what our governments rightfully are responsible for in our societies. There's so much chance to innovate in that, and that also needs to be public goods. And interestingly, we don't have a good track record of that as humanity. We were great at industry building these public goods to run the tech industry, but it always ends up in being these quite small, and I think the India stack is a counter example that does mostly get to the end services layer. Mostly small boutique commercial players, and maybe not always boutique, that dominate in healthcare, in education, in public services. We need to take the chance that we have to build new exciting things fast in the services that are at the top of the stack that we need as citizens, as countries, and make those open source as well. And by doing that, then Canada, where I'm coming from, India, Germany, South Korea, anywhere, we can go fast together in building better public services with AI.
In my other role as a past investor, when I talk to entrepreneurs, they either don't say it or are shying away from public service terminology because it's not cool or it's because something that governments have to do and we are not basically innovating. And I think I like what you said about the innovation. The service layer is critical today because it creates so much wealth and value that we have not seen it and not understand it. Maybe to illustrate, we're going to go to two examples, one in Singapore, one in India. Maybe once you can talk about how you basically create this framing and environment, right, to test those ideas in Singapore in a safe manner, and how this translates into value not only as typical public good, but really services that benefit people and create value. And maybe Professor Ravi can also follow with what India has done, which is also extremely interesting.
Thanks, Amir. That's a big question. Yeah, I'll see where I can maybe more specifically focus on certain areas. Actually, I absolutely agree with my fellow panelists, what you've highlighted, the need to invest in public good and the need to invest in public services, and how do we bring AI into this? I think maybe instead of talking about broad concepts, maybe I'll just bring down to the individual, right? How do individuals in Singapore, for example, and how can public services benefit them individually? Or how can AI benefit them individually so that they could also be able to be part of this inclusive economic progress? I think individuals need to feel that they are not left behind. I think that's important. So I can use the public service maybe as an example. I'm in the public service. So I hope the money that goes to my salary actually translates into public good, to Mark's point. But let's look at what public service have done so far in Singapore with regards to AI. My colleagues in public service actually use AI quite a lot nowadays, right? For example, in the Ministry of Education, colleagues are using AI to build tools to help students look for self-directed learning, right? So that's one way in which they are creating with AI to benefit students, to benefit in education. For more mundane things, they are using AI to write speeches for ministers and for their bosses. Translates into some kind of productivity gain, but also to summarize meeting notes and so on. It's a way for them to feel that they could use this tool effectively to help them in their jobs, and they can be part of that progress and be included, right, in the development. They're using AI to build chatbots, right, augmenting it with documents and data from the public service so that they can better address citizen queries, right, that they're accurate, reliable, and actually give the right answers, right? So these are all examples of how the public servants, individuals have embraced the technology to actually bring about public good. So this is one element of the public services stack that I want to talk about, human capital development, training and skills that is required. And if you then think about how you translate this, what's happening in the public service, in public servants individually, and translating this into the broader economy, into more individuals in different sectors, in financial services, in healthcare, in legal, and so on. And as individuals feel that they have agency. Somebody mentioned agency earlier. They have agency to be part of the AI economy, then I think we can definitely create a lot of public good. Then they can be part of that progress. And so in human capital development, we're doing a lot of work in training, in skills, whether it's reskilling, upskilling, in literacy. I mean, we work with Cognizant, in some of these digital literacy kind of programs to help young people, older people understand how they can use technology effectively, how they can interact with technology safely. But a lot of it is really about we need to embrace this technology responsibly. And how do we do that as individuals? So that's just one element of the public services stack that I thought we need to highlight. I mean, there's so many, many other aspects to that. But remembering that at the heart of it all is the person who can choose to embrace it, who can choose to use it, and how do we provide, taking public services money, provide that capacity to these individuals.
So, Professor Ravi, India has given the world a few examples practically about scaling up in that level. But before you answer, I think it was important to notice that you mentioned the individual. We talk about the individual agency, having the ability to be, for instance, having access to preventative health in a trusted manner for everyone creates a lot of services opportunities. This is just the government. Government can influence that, but there is so much innovation to be done over there. But I think the mechanisms are not in place to do that. But maybe India has done something that we can learn from.
Well, like you said, one of the biggest success stories has been the DPI that we have built around, identity verification, like the Aadhaar stack, and also the payment gateway, and so on and so forth. And in fact, one of the amazing things about doing this at scale is because it opens up so much opportunity. We're talking about inclusive economic progress. So the UPI, the payment interface, is allowing us to record economic transactions at a granularity that has never been possible before. Now, when we start thinking about building AI services on top of this kind of data available, we have to start thinking about new kinds of problems which we can't solve in any other economy, right? So these are things that really opens up amazing avenues for economic progress. So that's just something I wanted to mention. And also, it's not just in the existing infrastructure. The government is actually encouraging a lot of large-scale DPI development in the AI space. In fact, just last week on Friday, on Thursday and Friday, there was this major AI education initiative that was launched in Bharat Mandapam, where one of the goals of that, the Bodhan AI initiative, is to build a digital public AI stack for education, right? So this will be a lot more of an open architecture where people can come and contribute their tools, and they can also pull the tools out from this, and this is all going to be open, right? So, I mean, open access, like open licensing, right? Not necessarily open source. Because, I mean, in this day and age of very large AI models, I don't know what open source means anymore, right? So, I mean, it's not like people are going to start training their own models from scratch, even if I give them the code. Anyway, so this is all going to be open access, and that's good. That entire stack is going to be released over the next 3 to 4 years is the goal for us to have the AI stack, and we will also started onboarding developers who will build education services on top of the stack. So we are trying to replicate the same DPI model in, we're going to do this across sectors. So the education one that's been announced, and there's going to be one on healthcare, there'll be one on smart cities, and then one on agriculture, and so on. So there are various sectors in which India has already identified, announcing these kinds of open stack models for building AI applications. So we are trying to push the boundary in that.
That's interesting. You're bringing a variety of stacks here now on education, on healthcare, maybe on public, maybe mental illness or anything else. Interesting that you bring that. As we develop technology, there is fast-running technology out there that provide us frameworks, and we create dependencies. And then these dependencies basically locks us into a mechanism of entrepreneur, and those who are doing basically are advancing in France. Joanna told us that even the last 2 months, things have shaped completely and different now. I'd like to ask Mark, how we can avoid dependency and lock-in long-term? Because open source is one answer, but what else is there? If you think about now, stacks for education, a stack for healthcare, a stack for financing and so forth, and people want to innovate there. What is this concept of vendor lock-in in the future? How this will evolve, in your opinion?
Excellent question, and a bunch of places to go with that. I mean, I think maybe I'll answer how do we avoid the lock-in in 3 ways. One is I do think really looking as we build out and use public dollars on these things, something closer to the original definition of open source. And I think it is a problem in AI, but there's an old kind of adage more from the free software community of there was 2 ways that they looked at software. One was, software that was free speech, and the other which was free beer. And so you got to be careful of the free beer model, where it's just something you can take. It's very, very attractive, but it doesn't actually give you anything in terms of your ability to shape it and take it anywhere. And I worry that whether it is Alibaba or OpenAI, you have these open-ish models, these open weights models that you can't see inside. You can't see the provenance of them. You can take them for free. You can modify them in some ways, but they're not transparent, they're not inspectable, and actually you're still locked into them in that way. You can't modify them and take them and make them your own. And free speech means I can take it and I can shape it. And so I think anytime we're doing anything, whether it's education software or investing in the national model for this or that, which of course you don't want to train from scratch, we need to look for something that really we can inspect and change over time. And that inspect and change over time is a key property that avoids lock-in. But then the second thing I would say is really important is to spread the economic opportunity globally away from these 3, 4, 5 people in probably 2 regions of the world. And that means really building the talent base in your country to build on top of these open source assets and these stacks. Like, we need to be, again, as a Canadian, not buying from forward deployed engineers from Palantir or OpenAI or even Microsoft, but from Canadian companies or from Indian companies or from Korean companies. And one of the benefits of digital public infrastructure, of course, there's an economy in implementing it. That's one of the roles of the private sector. And build those private sector companies in your country and not rely on others to deliver on. There is no reason. And so I think that's one way around the lock-in. And then the third, which I think is an architecture which is still just emerging in the AI era, is really this old, old adage of interoperability, or old idea of interoperability. Many of the things we're talking about, whether they're data centers, foundation models, these things are becoming commodities. And it's a trick that gets played on us to think that one is so special over the other. What we really need to see is to understand the commodities and let them be commodities that are useful to us, and then make it easy to switch between them. And of course, that's how you avoid lock-in.
Thank you, Mark. Your comments make me think about not only responsibility and trustworthiness and trust, but also contestability. We don't have a mechanism for the public, for every citizen to contest, right, what's proposed to them today. There is no, like when we do election, we have the record of what's happening. Today, we don't have that. So I'd like to ask the question to Joanna and then Alpesh about how should we think, right, thinking about public services, service for society, and all this innovation that will come from private or public sector, how we should think about accountability and trust building at the individual level, not just at institutional, because it's easy to think about policy and regulation as a guardrail for us. How should we think about it ourselves? It may require reskilling and training, as you suggested, but beyond that, if you think about moving ahead in the future, what is this concept of accountability, if you think you have an answer for that, and trust building? Because at the end, we want everyone to be able to contest, right, what they see, to have critical thinking, to have basically an answer to that. If my question is clear to you, I would like your because you have a very interesting outlook on that, and I think Alpesh also has some outlook on that in terms of trust building. Should I repeat my question?
So I think one thing I wanted to say before we get to that is around sovereignty in general, just following up on what Mark said, because I can't let it go. A country that accepts a model from one of these 4 or 5 players, the risk to sovereignty is enormous. And when you get back to trust and Amir's question, how do you assure people that their data is private, that that their services are trusted? This all starts with the foundation. So I really firmly believe that the bringing in domain experts within the country, customizing this on a small model on top of the foundational model, the open source or whatever you choose to use, using that local expertise from universities, from hospitals, from, wherever it comes from, researchers, is absolutely vital and sends the message to the public that this is a way of, this is a civilization uplift moment that AI is meant to be, because we're going to do something completely different for you. We're going to deliver services in a new way. We're going to reinvent how government interacts with people. I mean, all these things are really important, but in order to do that properly, you can't give away your sovereignty by using a model that is not transparent, and you have no idea how to modify or build on top of that. It's just extremely risky.
How do you translate the sovereignty from the government level to the individual level, if someone has an answer for that? Because many entrepreneurs, they use cloud or DeepSeek or anything open source, and they couldn't much care, right, about the government sovereignty or anything else, right? The concept of that is not really anchored into every individual. You need to get going, you want to innovate, you want to go fast, you want to test, you want to compare, you want to show your work. There's a market opportunity out there. Why should we bother about the sovereignty issues at the individual level? Anyone who can answer
at
that?
the startup level?
Yeah, sure. At the startup level, or as an individual innovator, it could be private or public.
Well, I think whether it's a startup or me as an individual, actually the question of sovereignty matters differently, but even more. In that if I'm a startup and I'm trying to build something valuable, do I want to build that on somebody else's rented land, some land they're renting to me? Or do I want to build it in a way that I own it? And there's a reason that Facebook or Twitter or whatever were built on Linux, were built on the LAMP stack. Because that was the cheap way for them to fully own the technology, not to build on the Microsoft stack or the other things at the time. That's the reason that open source is the underpinning of the tech industry. Because startups know you want to have the raw material that you own. And right now, with the major centralized cloud-based AI players, there's no portability. You build your business on top of them, you are locked into them, and you are renting from them forever. So that is the reason to care about sovereignty. If it's your business, you should own it, and you need to build on technology that you can own. And I would say the same about me and you and my data and your data. Right now, if I have an OpenAI subscription or a Claude subscription, I train it to be me. I train it to know me. I train it to talk like me, and I cannot take that memory of myself anywhere right now. That is crazy in the architecture of how these things are built. So one of the things we really need standards on, and we'd love to kind of have the standards conversation about, is making my memory portable and sovereign and mine and private. It's architecturally quite trivial to do this. It's just not in the interest of the people who currently are dominating the market. So I think there is a sovereignty case at the government level, at the entrepreneur level, and the individual level that we need to solve, and it's actually quite solvable.
And I guess that one of the most important things, because it's true that it's so sensitive when you're going to be producing outcomes for people in the health systems, in the education systems, to be relying on infrastructure that you do not control. And therefore, the question of data is key. And governments have a lot of data, and that's data that can be used and deployed in ways that are suitable for themselves. The good news is also that the cost of producing applications had come down 90% in the last years. Therefore, you can do it. But what does it take to be sovereign? It takes to invest in your own capacities. Because at the end, one area that I have been looking very closely is the education systems. When you go into the education systems and you just want to put the technology in front of the teachers and the students and forgetting that the outcome should be improved learning for kids, but that is content sensitive, that is culturally relevant, and that you prepare your teachers to do it in a way that is really according to your own nature or whatever you want to keep, I feel we are forgetting again, it's not about the technology, it's about how do you organize the systems, and that's why you need to be fit for purpose. And for me, the most important element for that sovereign layer is to be fit for purpose. And I don't think that the governments are doing the massive investment in themselves to be prepared for that.
Thank you.
Maybe, okay, I'll just add on very quickly to what Gabriela just said, because I agree. I think maybe the different way of thinking about sovereignty is less about, dependency, but really about where you have control and where you have, back to that point about agency. And I think you have control and agency over context. You know how to apply this in your context to your needs, right? So a couple of examples, right? Number one, making sure that the models are actually addressing your needs, right? So making sure that they address your culture, your language, and so on. So we've done some work in the space. The Sea Lion Initiative is our way of trying to, fine-tune or continuously pre-train some open source models so that they are applicable to the Southeast Asian context. So that's one way in which you could have sovereignty. You are able to control the context. Two, I think to Gabriela's point, the point about how do you apply this in your environment, in education, in healthcare, in financial services, in transport, and so on, is also another way in which you could try and be able to benefit from AI without worrying about. I think it's difficult to have that conversation about, I only want to use open source and I don't want to use, the big models, because sometimes, there are some benefits here and there, right? So in Singapore, we're very small. We're not going to be training our own foundation models anyway. So, but where we think we have some levels of control, then it's how then do we use this in areas that actually translate into real benefits and real outcomes, economically or from a societal perspective. And that's in the application layer.
Alpesh?
So just going back to your question of accountability and trust and appreciating, I think everyone's given very good reasons about individual sovereignty. So I'm going to speak to it maybe from a different lens, which is that, you know, we're making the conversation about the technology. And the technology is the least important part of it. Technology is the enabler. It must be done a certain way to enable the outcomes we desire. But the other element that comes along with this is that when we talk about startups and, you know, running without guardrails, right? You know, we've heard that throughout the series so far. In another life, and I think many of you would appreciate this, you know, what helps startups, what helps even established companies are good tax incentives, okay? It's the economic value attributed to the things that they must pursue in order to achieve their goals. And their goals may be their shareholder goals, they may be the goals of their minority holder, it might be their own, you know, interest to get to a certain level. Whatever it is, there's an economic barrier that exists there. And we've seen where VCs and others will take and utilize criteria from standards to help identify, you know, what could be the next group. But what really needs to kind of be taken better into play as we talk about a lot of this is that there have to be financial incentives on the forefront, and on the back end there need to be tax incentives to enable the delay that people are talking about. Otherwise, there's no reason for anyone to stop, right? At the same time, the asset class that we're talking about being developed from the DPGs and all the other items that are coming across create an additional opportunity that many of you have already noted. Mark says it very well, that you should own your own data, right? But if you don't own your data, you should at least have the ability to choose who you can engage with, right? And that's the other part of this. So the financial packages combined with sovereignty plays really give the opportunity for the type of outcome that we're seeking. What would take it a step further is the ability to access those markets that they're typically cut off from. The combination of those three things allows you to have a stepwise approach to realizing scalable outcomes that are still responsibly developed.
Thank you, Alpesh.
Sure.
Last word.
Well, he made several of the points that I was going to make. So one thing is, of course, we need to make sure it's not just a question of controlling the data, because even if you say that you have to use a sovereign model, right, it's still somebody else who's building these LLMs for you to use. Maybe it's not somebody outside the borders of your country, but still, as a startup, you are dependent on somebody else providing the service, right? And this is also, the investments required to build these LLMs have become almost like investing in like another utility service. It's not that every startup is going to be sovereign at that level of the startup in building these models. So having said that, so of course, the economic incentives are a big factor. And the other thing that we are trying to do with the AI stack, right, is to make sure that the models that we build, like we have done with the C-line model, are so much more grounded in the local context, right? So they can actually teach children in the local language that's being spoken at home. And contrary to popular opinion, it's not just 22, right? So if you come to India, you have a couple of hundred languages which people speak at home. So if you can, how do you build this kind of AI from, I mean, sovereign AI stack? That really doesn't make sense for you to go to one of these, you know, bigger models, non-sovereign models for it to use. And again, the data is still not available for people to build these models outside the borders of India. So I think we also have to not just give these economic incentives, but also we have to give a technologically sound reason for people to start choosing sovereign models, and just mandating that they should do so is not going to work.
Thank you. Well, we approached the topic under multiple lenses. We talked about sovereignty, we just talked about human agency, we talk about the incentives and the standards, and also the fact that we have to be able to choose how to do it in a sound way. it seems that the public AI stack needs to incorporate at least human agency, transparency, openness, but also incentives in any shape or form. And somehow some pragmatism, but because not everything can be open or closed at this point, we're still learning. So as this evolving landscape, I think the public AI stack that we use usually for public good should be probably specified that we need services, public services that could be delivered to people in a transparent, interoperable manner. That's what you said. To close our conversation, think about this concept of public service AI stack in a simple few words. Each of you, what would be the one thing that we should not miss to get there? The one thing that should not miss. You talk, for instance, I'm sure someone will talk about incentives. But what is that one thing that we should pay attention to? Because we covered a lot and we don't have enough time to cover deeper than that and to go everywhere. But go ahead.
I'm very sorry, but this is beyond, but I'm just publishing a book with Springer. and I talk about the 4 I's, which is incentives, investments, infrastructure, and institutions. So 4 I's.
Thank you. Joanna? Okay. Mark?
I mean, I think it's come from so many of the people here, which is just don't forget the humans in this. I mean, this is really about stuff that brings us, you know, that educates us, that serves us, and that we are in control of and have agency over. So just in any of it, really we are under testing, under designing for us as humans in these systems.
So I was going to say the context, right? So the context in which you're building these have to be really front and center, and it's not like one size that's going to work for all. So.
Thank you.
I'll say trust. I think it has to be grounded in trust. I think we have to, as we deliver all of these things, we have to make sure that the humans and the public continue to trust the technology that they're using.
Alpesh?
I'll say inclusive, utility. I mean, what we're talking about is a public utility.
Yeah.
And I would say incentives.
The last word from you, Joanna.
I would say that the most important thing, we learned a lot in the last 10 years or 15 years with social media, and which are the most advanced AI systems in the world. And they have shaped our information universe in a way that is not ideal. And so we are at a critical moment. And I think if I had one word, it would be caution and awareness. So I'll give you 2. Sorry, Amir. But I really believe that awareness of what's happening, because when you think about bringing a model into education, for instance, you're going to be educating those children based on the information ecosystem that was used to train that, which is all mostly Western data from a certain number of countries, right? And that's where the bulk of the data is, and that means that your unique culture, the capabilities of your country, what is unique about you is missing in that equation. So I think we talked about it from the perspective of transparency, but we also need to think about it from the perspective of models and how they're trained, and how we want to make sure that all these rich cultures around the world continue to be, represented, and we don't become some flat monoculture that is dictated by a certain number of countries.
Such a nice way to end this conversation. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you all. We have 6 amazing speakers from 6 countries with a variety of experience. We tried, this was not the goal to build a blueprint of any sort, but to open some of this conversation. I think all of you are going to be the architect of this change. And as entrepreneurs as you are, or thinkers, you're going to come up with the new wave. And I think the incentives to create value that benefit people should be increased. Thank you all.